The latest thing to come under attack in this country is patently ridiculous. We're talking about people being offended by Christmas songs. But also in this video, Labour's latest attack upon the motorist, a rather hilarious story about Rachel Reeves, which I think is funny anyway, we'll come back to that in a minute, but also a bit of a childish rant by Zara Sultana on X, which, if I get time, I'll come back to that later in the video. She's making some rather naive claims and I need to address those. So we are here on Black Belt Secrets because it is something of a gossip video and a bit of a tongue-in-cheek video, so please do subscribe here. It's a different channel. I've got a number of channels. I love doing YouTube. But let's come to this first rather ridiculous story. Offended by Christmas songs? Who is being offended by Christmas songs? Now, let's look at this in the round. Okay, we might say that some songs written some time ago may have lyrics that some people may, on a very careful analysis, might take offense to. But should they really be offended by them? Now, of course, this article is talking about Labour's rather controversial employment rights bill, which would provide a legal duty upon employers to make sure that their staff and their customers and everyone else are not caused harassment by third parties, which on the face of it would include somebody singing along with lyrics that they get offended by. So in the case of a pub, for example, a pub landlord would have a legal duty to prevent its staff and its customers from feeling harassment by third parties, which would include people telling jokes that they find offensive and even, as this article spells out, singing along to Christmas songs. So they could end up being banned because some people might be offended by them. Now, as I say, some of these lyrics, if you were to come up with them today, some people might say, ooh, I don't know if you should say that. But at the same time, we've been singing these songs for some time now, and I don't think anyone seriously even listens to the words half the time, much less takes offense to them. But we have examples here. Baby, it's cold outside. Now, let me know in the comments if you've actually ever listened to and considered these lyrics properly, and moreover, whether you've taken offense to any of them, but there we go. Now, on one analysis of some of these lyrics, some people may argue that they perpetuate stereotypes, they might be somewhat insensitive, there might be a deeper meaning, there might be some historical meaning that it refers back to, or in the case of Jingle Bells, I'm reading and learning for the first time that an academic found that this was apparently first performed in blackface in a minstrel show in Boston in September 1857. Now, I've never thought about that in any kind of racist connotation whatsoever, and I don't think anybody today would think of it in that sense either. And if they understand the meaning of it, they would probably be against that meaning. I think most people reasonably and sensibly would be against that meaning. But also, I think we should take a common sense and sensible approach to these things and say, let's not get upset and alarmed and distressed and certainly not harassed by some of these things that have been around for a long time just because they've made their way into what is just a festive celebration. I think if you were to analyze everything on a very careful note like that, I think obviously a lot of people might disagree with those things, but generally, I don't think that really should be the standard approach to it, but certainly not as this law would now have it, which has now received royal assent after some back and forth and parliamentary ping pong. Now that this has actually become law, it will be the legal duty of employers, and obviously in the sense of bars and pubs and clubs and things like that, the employer has a legal duty to prevent anybody from feeling harassed by anything at all. So even from people telling jokes with each other, banter with each other, or in this case, playing certain songs which may have some connotation, which may offend somebody, and who may feel that they've got some kind of harassment, which in itself is kind of strange because harassment is supposed to be a course of conduct. It's supposed to be more than one occasion, not just, a one-off. A song's played, they're upset by it. That doesn't amount to harassment, but nonetheless, there is this now legal duty. So I think that is all a bit strange. But let me know what you think in the comments and we'll move swiftly on. Now, here's a story that was kept relatively quiet, but is actually quite a big deal. Did you know that in June this year, 2025, HMRC lost £47 million of taxpayer money to scammers who were impersonating people? This wasn't some kind of sophisticated cybersecurity attack. These were scammers that had stolen the details of 100,000 people, posed as those people to HMRC in order to steal their money. Now, HMRC did make it clear that the money was taken fraudulently and it was stolen from HMRC rather than from the taxpayers, so the taxpayers themselves didn't lose out. Or did they? Because ultimately it was still £47 million of taxpayer money that was stolen using stolen ID and details and so forth. This is what we call a phishing attack, using someone's details to pose as that person to get some benefit as a result of that information. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because I partner with companies on my channel here, one of whom is NordVPN, who protects you from these phishing attacks, from stealing your information, because these scammers will take enough of your information in order to pose as you. And these are very real threats. They took £47 million just in this one attack alone. NordVPN will help to protect you visiting websites and downloads and opening files that might pose as a phishing attempt to gather and steal your information, and they'll protect you from those on all your devices. You download it, you install it, it's very quick, and as a partner to my channel, you get 4 months free on top of any deal they run at the link nordvpn.com/blackbeltsecrets. I'll link it in the description below. And that will give you protection as a shield from malicious websites and downloads where they try to steal your information and impersonate you. And for less than the price of a cup of coffee, it is an absolute no-brainer. Don't hang around, grab NordVPN. I would not promote something to you that I didn't think was worth it. Don't forget the link for 4 months free and you won't regret it. Now, apparently motorists are facing a new problem with parking spaces. Now, I don't know if you know this, but when planning permission is granted for new housing areas, they are recommended, local authorities are recommended to put limits on the amount of parking, which again makes some kind of common sense because they can't just have hundreds and hundreds of parking spaces just because they're building new houses. Although it stands to reason that they should have new houses, because if they want to encourage people to be able to get to and from work and so on, they really ought to have parking spaces. Although it appears that Labour are anti-car and pro-public transport or walking, because their proposals are to change these things so that it is no longer just a recommendation, but they want to put a mandatory limit on the parking spaces in these areas. And now some people are saying that this is all in the name of net zero and preventing people from using vehicles. And some campaigners have said that this is obviously going to backfire, because if there are no parking space or inadequate parking spaces for those houses, they're going to end up parking on the streets, off-road, down side roads, and often in illegal or dangerous parking and everywhere else. And to that end, I've dealt with a lot of cases of parking disputes recently, trying to assist people. And I'm developing my Black Belt Barrister Pro, which will help people fight parking tickets. You'll find that link below. But I agree with the campaigners in that I think this is a silly attack upon motorists if they are going to mandate a maximum amount of parking spaces for these areas. And it's only going to lead to more tickets and more fines and so on. Bearing in mind, it was not that long ago that Southwark Authority was forced to refund almost £500,000 because they simply quoted the wrong law on lots of parking tickets, and they had to refund over 10,000 penalty charge notices in just a few months because they were caught out because the bus lane was actually, in fact, unenforceable. Now back to Rachel Reeves, and just before I get to the funny bit, let's look at this headline here. We're on Black Belt Secrets, so I look at some of these headlines here. Rachel Reeves is finished. What Labour's planning next should terrify everyone in Britain. And apparently there's a serious effort to get rid of Rachel Reeves, and it's coming from inside the Labour Party itself. They've seen Rachel Reeves up close and concluded she's not up to the job. I think finally they're catching up to a lot of other people think. The problem is they've identified someone that they think would do better, and the choice shows just how detached and dangerous the party's thinking has become. Labour are the ones that forced Reeves on us in the first place. They then cooked up a strategy pretending that they wouldn't raise taxes if they won an election, only to dump them on us the moment they got into power, and they've done so ever since. They justified this by claiming that they've uncovered a £22 billion black hole, which obviously there was no real facts or evidence about. They refused to admit it, and it couldn't be substantiated. That was obviously an outright lie. But as the article claims, and if you hadn't guessed yet, the proposed replacement might be Ed Miliband. The article says, Labour wouldn't do that to us, would they? Oh yes, they would. The report confirms what I've written before. Apparently, they think he's doing a brilliant job and would happily see him elevated to one of the greatest office of the state, according to the Express article. This is one of those times where I hope articles are wrong, but actually they turn out to be quite accurate some of the time, so there we are. But the funny bit, as I promised you, remember I was talking about pubs and everything else? Well, first of all, a not so funny bit in that the rise in taxes is causing a real difficulty for a lot of pubs around the country, despite them telling us that these things are improving and that she's so-called stabilised the economy. But because of all this, Rachel Reeves has now reportedly been barred from her own local pub as a direct result of these taxes hitting the hospitality industry. The pub landlord in Leeds has told her not to step inside his venue this Christmas after a sharp rise in business rates left him £2,500 worse off. Martin Knowles, who runs the Marsh Inn, has said that he's moved to ban Labour MPs from the pub, including Rachel Reeves, in a direct response to the government's tax hikes in the hospitality sector. So I personally thought that was quite funny. She's been barred from her own pub as a direct result of her own actions, which have attacked these local businesses in those areas. But now, finally, I think we've got time. If you're still with me, let's move to these posts by Zara Sultana. She's posting again and again. There are lots of them. I'm not going to show you lots of them. I'll show you one of them, which shows you exactly what she's talking about. She's obviously talking about these hunger strikes. Now, I'm not going to go into the reasons for it. I'm not going to debate the reasons for it. I'm not going to talk about the underlying causes and what they're doing it for or any of that matter, or even whether or not they should be striking to achieve a certain aim. Obviously, in history, people have done that. They have achieved something. But here's what she's posting here, because regardless of any of the underlying arguments, because I'm not going to go into those arguments, you may fall either side of those, and I'm not going to say you're right or wrong in any of those. I can see both arguments. I just don't like people to attack each other. That's the bottom line. But let's move to her post here. Now, she says, today is day 50 of the hunger strike. Now, the only thing I'll say about that is if someone is on hunger strike, the only person they can blame for becoming ill is themselves, because if they're on hunger strike, they are doing it to themselves. There are all sorts of rules and procedures that the prison service has to follow if someone becomes ill and all these kind of things. But the strike itself is ultimately down to them, and then they have to be dealt with by way of the procedures and the rules and so on. If there's negligence in the way they apply those rules, that's a different matter, but that'll be decided later. But then she goes on to say, this Labour government must release all remand prisoners on bail immediately. Now, aside from anything else, one does not get bail just because you're on hunger strike. And moreover, this Labour government or any part of the government or any part of the executive branch cannot do anything at all with regard to remand prisoners, because the grant of bail is purely a judicial function, save for some rare exceptions for immigration bail and things like that, where the Home Secretary can intervene, and I can look into that, but that's not applying here. But apart from that, it is a judicial function. Now, there is a presumption in favour of bail, but there are objections that can be made, and if made out, then bail's refused and they're remanded into custody. Now, even without going into all of the other arguments underneath, if there are arguments about their detention, about how they're detained and how they're treated and so on, there are proper routes that they need to follow. Now, I'm not saying that I agree with all the rules and the procedures and the timeframes and whether it's fair and whether it works properly, and I am critical of the system in many ways, and in many ways it doesn't work. I've got an appeal here, which I'll talk to you about, which there's a whole list of things that we have to go through just to deal with one appeal. And part of which I'll describe to you in another video, part of which is we must seek out a transcript in order to actually have the appeal. You're supposed to have the transcript to get permission to appeal, but I just applied for permission without it because I really predicted that we wouldn't get it in time. And I was right. The court only sent the disc to the transcribers 2 days before the deadline, and they take, at least 48 hours, even on the fast turnaround to get the transcript back to you. The standard service being 12 working days, which is cheaper. But I applied for permission to appeal anyway, and I got permission, so I'll tell you about that a little bit later. But a whole page of directions you have to follow if you want to do one of these appeals. So I am critical of the system. I sometimes don't think it works. But all that said, if they want to challenge the grounds of their continued detention and maybe the treatment and everything else, there are proper ways of doing it. And it's usually by way of judicial review, because a public law decision by a public body is challengeable by way of judicial review. But even then, you need permission, and it's very difficult and complicated and so on. You cannot simply go on a hunger strike and demand that you are released on bail. That's not how it works, and that's not going to happen. And then Zara goes on to say, if they die, more blood will be on the hands of David Lammy and Keir Starmer. And frankly, As much as I've criticised them, I think that is incredibly unfair to David Lammy and to Keir Starmer, because this is absolutely not on them. Somebody going on hunger strike is absolutely not on them, not least of which because it's the prison service who are directly responsible for them, and they are on hunger strike, and that's their own choice. Like I say, I'm not debating the underlying causes here, whether there's a worthy cause of going on hunger strike or all these things. If you do have views on that, let me know in the comments, but remain polite and respectful, please, as I always ask you to do on my channels. I always like to stay fair and balanced on this channel. But demanding that all remand prisoners, that is some, I don't know, what, 20,000 or whatever people released on bail immediately? That's just not going to happen. And even if it were going to happen, it's not the government that can do it. It is a judicial function. It is a judicial decision not to grant them bail. And bearing in mind, there must be a good reason in each case that they've been refused bail. Usually interfering with witnesses, absconding, committing further offences, or they've committed an offence whilst on bail, or, no fixed abodes. And again, there's all sorts of arguments as to why they would not get bail, but that's down to the court. And if they have an issue with that, there's no upper hard limit on the applications for bail. It just needs to be a material change in circumstances, or they can challenge it by way of judicial review. That's the proper route, not just shouting and screaming on X at David Lammy and Keir Starmer, which, frankly, for an MP, I think is a bit embarrassing. But there we go. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I've had a lot of people ask me about that, so I thought I'd make a brief mention of it here on Secrets. Please do subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.